So the Times in the UK posted this infamous map about supposed Palestinian quote-unquote loss of land, even though I don't know what that Palestinian meant in 1946. But they posted this, and it's so important that we get clarity on this nonsense that is shown everywhere in anti-Israel tables they do on campuses and in pamphlets, and the fact that it's being shown on the Times, which is such a prestigious newspaper in the UK, shows how just widespread this myth is, and we need to unpack it. Okay, so Honest Reporting actually did a very good breakdown of the map, and I want to go through it with you because it's so important that we get clarity on this lie. Because when you look at this map, you think, well, goodness me, the Palestinian land in red. Look how it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and Jewish Israeli land gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So clearly, Palestinian good, Israel bad. Well, it's actually pretty shameful that they posted this map because it is so what's the right word? God, I'm losing my vocabulary today. It's confusing? No, that's not the word. What word do I want? Misleading. That's it. Misleading. Sorry. Long weekend. All right. So, map number 1. Let's go through it bit by bit. 1946. The first map purports to show historic Palestine and is filled with red, indicating that it is one self-governing state, the Palestinian territory. But in the period preceding British rule, the region was administered by Turkey and stretched into modern-day Lebanon and Syria. So there was never a Palestinian state, never an independent Arab state here. The area at the time was never a sovereign entity in its own right, and the boundaries shown in such a map do not reflect the boundaries of the region as administered by the Ottomans, nor as they appeared under previous rulers. Now, here's the part that I really didn't seem to understand. They're talking about the yellow bit being Israeli or Jewish land, but this is 1946. So as Honest Reporting right, the yellow Jewish land here evidently denotes areas where Jews lived. But by that logic then, surely there should be patches of red in the later maps indicating the presence of Arabs living in Israel. So they've conflated Jews in this map with Israel in later maps. So the map fundamentally misleads with regard to the issue it supposedly illustrates, which is the borders of a Palestinian state, supposedly. Another important point, if the yellow areas are where Jews lived, then surely the red areas should show where Arabs lived, not just the rest of the land. Much of the land was uninhabited. It was the Negev Desert, for example. So the absence of Jews in these areas was matched by an absence of Arabs. So a more accurate rendering of this map would make clear where Arabs lived, and where Jews lived, and then where nobody lived. In fact, there were about 1 million Arabs in the land, alongside roughly 500,000 Jews. But because the red area is vastly larger than the yellow area, even though much of it was unpopulated, it utterly twists the historical reality. It's a lie. Right, let's have a look at this. This is also essential to understand. You need to be familiar with this map if you aren't already, because the map also conveniently leaves out a much larger area, as you can see here, about 70% of mandatory Palestine that had earlier been part of the region administered by Britain, but was demarcated in the 1920s and transferred to Arab control. Now, what's interesting to understand is that the Balfour Declaration in 1917 had earlier indicated that a Jewish homeland would be established in this region, including which is now modern-day Jordan. But the vast majority of it went on to become the independent state of Transjordan, later known simply as Jordan, a Muslim Arab state whose population mostly consists of Arab Palestinians. It is a Palestinian state, run by the Hashemite Kingdom, which is a non-Palestinian minority, and they don't seem to be bothered there about being ruled by a minority. What does that tell you about the Palestinian cause and their claims of wanting self-determination? Should answer all your questions there. Okay, by leaving out this region from the first map, the graphic shows only a fraction of the land that was originally part of mandatory Palestine, and ignores the fact that most of the area was given to Arabs some 20 years before the UN voted to partition the land again into 2 states. Right. Okay, let's look at map 2 now. This is perhaps the most mendacious and is the easiest to debunk of all of them. Whereas the other maps show realities on the ground, albeit in a highly misleading manner, this graphic shows something that was never a reality. It shows a plan that remains strictly theoretical. And this was a plan accepted by the Jews, by the way. This was the 1947 UN partition plan. The plan was, by the way, to divide the land into two states, one Arab, one Jewish. This was before any great displacement and Nakba they talk about occurred. And it was put to the vote at the UN in November 1947, on the 29th of November. The vote passed by a majority of 33 to 13, with 10 abstentions. It was never realised. While the Jewish community in Palestine joyously celebrated the UN's decision to ratify the re-establishment of a Jewish homeland, the local Arab population immediately took up arms in a bid to prevent Israel's birth. Had the Arabs accepted the plan as the Jews did, decades of conflict and bloodshed could have been prevented. You should also know, by the way, that the land split that they proposed was basically 50-50, as you can see here. This is like 50-50. But interestingly enough, the Arabs were going to get much more fertile land. Okay, the Jews were mainly given in the south. That's just desert, so not fertile. At least unless you do something radical to it. So they got the better end of the deal, even though I'd say the Jews had a far stronger claim to the land. Right, now, the map is also highly misleading when it appears under titles claiming to show a Palestinian loss of land, as this map does not reflect the reality of land distribution at any time. Including a theoretical plan alongside actual maps is profoundly disingenuous. So, then we talk about 1949 to 67. Another lie, the map does not actually show borders, but armistice lines. These are armistice lines that Israel signed with Jordan and Egypt in 1949 after its War of Independence. So Egypt controlled Gaza. There wasn't Palestinian land, a Palestinian state. They didn't even have the concept of a Palestinian identity. Because for them, they didn't care if they were controlled by Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, whoever. They just don't want the Jews to re-establish sovereignty. They don't care about a Palestinian state. If they did, why would they not be bothered by the Hashemite kingdom ruling them in Jordan when they've got a majority of Palestinians there? So under international law, these armistice lines are not borders. They merely mark the lines that are agreed by both sides when fighting ends. However, whereas Israeli territory is accurately portrayed, the areas labelled as Palestinian land was actually ruled by other states. Conveniently, the map does not show that Jordan retained control of the West Bank, illegally I might add, while Egypt held on to the Gaza Strip, also illegally. I mean, talk about illegal occupation that we hear all over the news the whole time about Israel. The Egyptians and Jordanians were guilty of that. Now, immediately after the 67 Six-Day War, Israel offered to return the territories it captured in return for peace. The Arabs refused to negotiate, saying no to peace or recognition. Once again, the Palestinians could have had much of this land, but their refusal to make peace cost them dearly. As Abba Eban said, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Now map 4, which they say is, this year. This map shows almost the complete opposite of the first one. Whereas in the latter, the open areas were marked as Palestine, in this map, Israel's presence is presumed everywhere that lies open. This makes sense inside Israel's internationally recognized boundaries, which are undisputedly one entity. But it makes considerably less sense when referring to the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, which is largely administered by Israel. While the Jewish state is responsible for civil control of 82% of the land, that does not mean that Israel has built all over it. Whatever one's position on the right of Jews to build in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the reality is that Jewish communities in the area, also referred to as settlements, constitute only a fraction of the land. Following the Oslo Accords in the 90s, Israel agreed to withdraw its military gradually from Palestinian areas and to transfer security responsibility of those areas to the Palestinian Legislative Council and the Palestinian Authority Police. This took place within the context of the division of the West Bank and Gaza into different sectors, classified as areas A, B, and C, thus handing the Palestinians political control for the first time in their history. Though these maps purport to show how territorial control over the land has shifted over time, they are fundamentally misleading. The inclusion of plans that remain strictly theoretical, as is the case with the UN partition plan, are outright lies. Furthermore, mixing different classifications of maps, with some indicating Jewish and Arab populations, and some indicating Israeli and Palestinian controlled territories, makes any meaningful comparison impossible. So, it's one thing to see these on anti-Israel demonstrations and tables on campuses, but to see it in the Times, it's pretty disturbing and does very little to restore trust in mainstream media. But you know what? I actually would say that when we look at these maps, and we get very defensive about the lies. Yes, of course it's full of lies, and yes, of course, Israel has always tried to make peace. But I actually am starting to pivot more now towards saying, you know what? We tried for so long to indulge in this idea that they just wanted to live alongside us. They don't. And actually, this land belongs to the Jewish people anyway. So, even if you want to say that it doesn't, well, we tried. We tried to make peace with them. I'm not going to even begin to indulge in the notion that the Jews have a lesser claim. No, the Jews have a much stronger claim. But you want to say, well, the Arabs also have a right to live there? We've tried. We've tried that for so long. So now to be honest, I think it's time to speak in very clear terms and say that actually, I think positive arguments are far stronger than negative ones. Let's not say, let's move away from the negative arguments of, well, we tried to do this and we tried to make it work. And, well, it would endanger our security if we gave, the Arabs, if we just left certain territories. I think we should move away from that because those are all negative. We should just start to speak in very clear, positive justification for our right to be there, which is that this whole territory, from the river to the sea, they like to talk about the river to the sea. So should we. This whole territory, from the river to the sea, is Jewish land. And that's true from a historical perspective. It's true from a legal perspective. It's true from an indigenous rights perspective. It's true from a biblical perspective. But most importantly of all, you can put all of that to one side. Even the argument of the law of war, that it was conquered in war, and that's how, countries gain territory, and that's just what's happened throughout history. We can put all of that to the side and simply say, this land belongs to the Jewish people because the creator of heaven and earth says so. End of discussion. The Islamic Republic of Iran. For over 4 decades, its leaders have stood defiantly, their voices thundering through Tehran's streets, chanting death to Israel and waging a relentless war on the West. But what fuels this fierce, unyielding hatred? Is it politics? A grab for regional power? Or something even more profound? A theology that casts Israel and the West as cosmic enemies in a divine battle for the end of days. In this JTV Plus documentary, we embark on a journey to unravel the apocalyptic beliefs at the core of Iran's revolution. We'll uncover the sacred Shia doctrines that prophesy a world reborn through chaos, where a hidden redeemer, the Mahdi, will rise to vanquish evil, with Israel and America as the ultimate foes. We'll dive deep into the mystical visions of a global Islamic order, where martyrdom and jihad pave the path to divine victory. We'll explore how these ancient beliefs shape Iran's every move, from its fiery rhetoric to its deadly proxy wars. From the revolutionary sermons of Ayatollah Khomeini, who ignited a nation, to the shadow wars of spies, cyber attacks, and missiles that have pushed the region to the brink. We'll trace the arc of a regime bent on reshaping history, and we'll reveal the climactic moment when Israel struck back with Operation Rising Lion. A daring, high-stakes operation that shook the world and redefined the conflict. This is not just a story of a nation, but of a creed that seeks to rewrite the future, a conflict that threatens to engulf us all. Join us as we expose the hidden truths behind what Iran sees as its sacred mission, its unrelenting rage, and the battle for our world's destiny. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.